The sun had just begun to set behind the small suburban houses, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The air felt calm, almost too calm, as Grace folded laundry in her bedroom. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was far away. The house had grown quieter with each passing year, and tonight that silence felt heavier than usual. She could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the occasional hum of the refrigerator, and the distant sound of a car passing by. But beyond that, nothing. No laughter, no music, no conversation. Just silence. Grace lived alone with her son, Daniel, though he wasn't really a boy anymore. He was 25 now, kind-hearted, responsible, and busy with his job at the local hospital. He still lived with her, saying he wanted to save money before moving out. But Grace knew he stayed partly because he worried about her. It had been 10 years since her husband Michael passed away. Time had softened the pain, but it never truly disappeared. Some nights she still caught herself reaching for the other side of the bed, only to remember it was empty. That evening, Grace finished folding the last of Daniel's shirts and placed them neatly on the chair near the door. She smiled faintly at the thought of him. He had always been considerate, but lately she sensed something different. He seemed distracted, thoughtful, and at times distant. She had asked him once if something was wrong, but he just smiled and said he was fine. Grace didn't press him. She trusted he would talk when he was ready. The sun dipped lower, and the soft glow of twilight filled the room. Grace moved to make her bed before turning in for the night. She smoothed the sheets and fluffed the pillows, humming quietly to herself. As she reached for the last pillow, her hand brushed against something that wasn't supposed to be there. She frowned slightly and pulled the pillow back. An envelope rested neatly in the center of her bed. Her name, Mom, was written on the front in Daniel's handwriting. The sight of it made her heart skip. Grace froze, staring at it for a long moment. It wasn't his birthday, and there was no special occasion. Why would he leave her a letter? A part of her wanted to call out to him to ask about it, but another part of her hesitated. The letter seemed intentional, placed carefully where he knew she'd find it. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking slightly under her weight. The envelope felt light in her hands, but her chest suddenly felt heavy. For some reason, she felt nervous. Maybe it was because Daniel rarely wrote anything down. He was a man of few words, more comfortable with actions than letters. With a deep breath, Grace slid her finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it slowly, her hands trembling just a little. The first line made her throat tighten. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means I've been thinking about something for a long time. And I finally needed to tell you." Grace's eyes softened. His handwriting was familiar, neat, slanted slightly to the right, the way it had been since he was a boy. She continued reading, her pulse quickening as she tried to imagine what he could possibly want to tell her through a letter instead of in person. "You've always been my strength. You never let me see how tired you were, even when I know you were. After Dad passed, you carried everything me. The house, the bills, the grief. You kept going. I'll never forget that." Her breath caught. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling a rush of emotion. She could almost hear his voice in the words, gentle, sincere, and full of love. "But lately, I've noticed something. You've stopped doing things for yourself. You wake up early, work all day, and then you just sit quietly in the evenings, watching the same shows, going through the same routines. I know you miss him. I do too. But I can't stand seeing you fade away like this." Grace's lips parted in surprise. It wasn't anger she felt. It was pain mixed with realization. Her son had noticed things she thought she had hidden. The long nights spent sitting alone on the porch, staring at the stars, pretending to be okay. She thought she was protecting him by staying quiet, but he had seen right through her. Her eyes moved to the next line. "I know I'm not Dad, and I can't fill that space in your heart. But I want you to know that I see you. I see how strong you are, but also how lonely. And I just want to do something that might help." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the words. She blinked them away and kept reading. "There's a part of you that's still full of life, someone who used to paint. who used to laugh so loud the neighbors could hear, who used to sing while making breakfast. That person is still there. Mom, you just forgot how to let her out." Grace's breath came in shaky waves. She could barely believe how well Daniel understood her. She remembered those mornings when the kitchen smelled like pancakes and coffee, when her laughter filled the house. That was another lifetime ago. She wiped her eyes and turned to the final part of the letter. "So I've done something. I hope you won't be upset. Next week, an art class is starting at the community center, the same one you used to talk about joining but never did. I've signed you up. You can go just once if you want. But please, Mom, do it for yourself. You deserve to feel alive again." Grace stared at the page, her heart swelling with 100 emotions. Shock, gratitude, love, sadness all tangled together. The idea of Daniel secretly signing her up for something felt both absurd and deeply moving at the bottom of the letter. One last line stood alone. "I love you, Mom. You've spent so long taking care of everyone else. Now it's time someone took care of you." Her tears spilled freely now. She pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. It wasn't just what he wrote, it was the truth behind every word. Her son had grown into a man who cared enough to see her pain and do something about it for a long while. Grace sat silently on the bed, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. The soft hum of the evening filled the room, again the clock ticking, the faint rustle of wind against the window. But something had changed. The silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. It felt full of love, full of meaning. She looked down at the letter again, a tear-stained smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered softly, "you have no idea what this means to me." As the last light faded from the window, Grace folded the letter carefully and placed it on her nightstand. She lay down, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts. For years she had gone to bed feeling empty. But that night she felt something different, a faint flicker of warmth, of hope, of purpose. And as she drifted to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind like a gentle whisper. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's not too late to start living again. The next morning, Grace woke up early, long before the sun had fully risen. The letter still sat on her nightstand, its edges slightly curled from how tightly she'd held it the night before. She stared at it for a moment, feeling that same mixture of surprise and tenderness rush through her chest. It had been years since anyone had done something so thoughtful for her. She got out of bed slowly, the wooden floor cool beneath her feet, and made her way to the kitchen. The smell of coffee soon filled the air, and for a brief moment the house didn't feel quite so empty. Daniel had already left for work, but he'd left a note on the counter. "Morning, Mom. Don't forget to eat breakfast. I love you." She smiled softly, touching the note as if she could feel his care through the ink. Her son had always been kind, but this was something deeper. He had looked at her life and seen what she'd refused to see herself. She had stopped living, stopped trying, stopped believing that joy could find her again. All morning she thought about the art class. She hadn't painted in nearly 20 years. Back then, painting had been her escape, a way to pour emotions she couldn't speak aloud. But after Michael's passing, the brushes went dry. The easel gathered dust, and color disappeared from her world. She had told herself it was too painful, that life was too busy. But deep down, she knew the real reason. She'd lost herself by noon. Grace stood in front of the old mirror near the hallway. Her reflection surprised her. The woman looking back had fine lines around her eyes and a quiet sadness in her gaze. Yet beneath that, there was still a hint of the woman she used to be, the one who loved the smell of paint, the feel of sunlight on her hands, the sound of laughter filling her kitchen. That afternoon, she called the community center. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke to the receptionist. "Hello, I'm calling about the art class starting next week. My name's Grace Mitchell, my son. He signed me up." The woman on the other end chuckled warmly. "Oh yes, Grace. Daniel told us you might call. We're so glad you'll be joining us." Grace smiled faintly, her heart tightening at the mention of her son's name. He didn't waste any time, did he? "He seemed very sure you'd love it," the woman replied. That conversation stayed in her mind all week. Every evening after work, Grace found herself glancing at the letter again. Sometimes she'll reread it, tracing the words with her fingers. Each line felt like a whisper urging her forward, reminding her that maybe life still had something left to offer. When the day of the art class finally arrived, Grace stood at her bedroom window, clutching her keys in one hand and her purse in the other. The morning sun streamed through the glass, warm and gentle. She felt nervous, unsure if she was ready to face people, to create again. But the memory of Daniel's handwriting gave her courage. "All right, Grace," she murmured to herself. "Let's do this." The community center wasn't far, just a short drive through the quiet streets of her town. The building looked the same as it had years ago, with big glass windows and cheerful posters about yoga, pottery, and local events. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paint and coffee. She found the classroom easily. It was bright and spacious, with long tables covered in brushes, canvases, and jars of colorful paints. A few people were already there, some chatting softly, others setting up their easels. They looked friendly, relaxed, ordinary. Grace felt her anxiety ease a little. A woman approached her with a warm smile. "You must be Grace. I'm Lydia, the instructor." Grace smiled politely. "Yes, that's me. It's been a long time since I've done this." Lydia's eyes softened. "Don't worry. We all start somewhere, or start again. You're in the right place." Those words, "start again," lingered in Grace's mind. The class began. And for the first few minutes, she felt clumsy, uncertain. Her hand trembled as she dipped the brush into the paint. The bright blue color looked almost too alive, too bold. But then Lydia's voice floated across the room. "There's no wrong way to begin. Just let the brush move." So she did. Slowly at first, then more freely. The soft sound of the bristles brushing the canvas filled her ears. It was strange, but the moment the paint touched the surface, something inside her stirred, something she hadn't felt in years. She painted simple things: the outline of a window, the curve of a flower, the reflection of light in water. Nothing grand or perfect, but honest, real. The colors came alive. And for the first time in a long time, Grace forgot about the ticking clock, the empty rooms, and the years she'd lost. By the end of the class, her hands were speckled with color. Lydia walked by and stopped to look at her canvas. "That's beautiful, Grace. There's real emotion in it." Grace looked at her painting and then at Lydia, her cheeks warming. "Thank you. I didn't think I still had it in me." "Oh, you do," Lydia said gently. "You just needed a reason to remember." When Grace drove home that day, her car felt lighter. The streets looked brighter, the air fresher. She rolled the window down and let the wind play with her hair. For the first time in years, she felt proud of herself, not for surviving, but for living. That evening, Daniel came home to find her humming in the kitchen. She was cooking his favorite chicken and rice with lemon and herbs. The air smelled warm and comforting. "Wow," he said, surprised. "What's the occasion?" Grace turned with a smile. "No occasion. I just felt like making something nice." Daniel noticed the faint streak of blue paint on her fingers. "You went." "I went," she said, her voice soft but steady. "And I loved it." His face lit up. "I knew you would." She walked over and hugged him tightly. For a moment, neither spoke. There were no words big enough to hold what she felt: the gratitude, the pride, the quiet joy. Later that night, after Daniel went to bed, Grace stood by the window holding a cup of tea. The moon hung low in silver, casting a gentle glow across the yard. She thought about how different she felt. It wasn't that everything was suddenly fixed or that the loneliness was gone. But for the first time in a long time, she had something to look forward to. She glanced at the letter on her nightstand again and whispered, "You were right, my dear boy. I had forgotten who I was." As she turned off the lights and crawled into bed, a small, peaceful smile formed on her lips. Tomorrow, she would go back to work. She would face the same routine, the same quiet house, but inside her. Something had changed, a spark had returned, and Grace knew. Deep down, this was only the beginning. A month passed, and Grace found herself looking forward to every Thursday evening more than anything else. The art class had become her small world of color and warmth. Each week, the room buzzed with laughter, the soft scrape of brushes, and the hum of stories being shared. Grace had begun to recognize the other students, the retired teacher who loved painting birds, the young mother who painted flowers, and the quiet man who always sat by the window sketching sunsets. That man was Tom Everett. He was around her age, maybe a few years older, with kind eyes and a calm presence. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was steady and thoughtful. Grace had noticed him from the first class, the way he focused on his work, the quiet gentleness in his movements. There was something peaceful about him, something she couldn't quite name. One evening, Lydia, their instructor, paired everyone up for a small project. "You'll work in pairs today," she announced cheerfully. "I want you to create something that tells a story." Grace's heart skipped when Lydia smiled in her direction. "Grace, you'll be with Tom." For a moment, Grace felt nervous, unsure if she could paint with someone else. But when Tom smiled and said, "Looks like we're a team," his tone was so easy that her hesitation faded. They settled near the window, sharing a canvas. "Any ideas?" he asked, dipping his brush into a pale shade of blue dot. Grace thought for a moment. "Maybe something simple, like a morning scene. Something calm." Tom nodded. "I like that. Calm is good." As they painted, they talked. Slowly at first, then with growing ease. He told her he had retired from teaching high school English the previous year. His wife, Ellen, had passed away 3 years ago. Grace listened quietly, recognizing that same emptiness she had felt for so long. "I stopped painting after she was gone," Tom said, his voice soft. "It just felt wrong, you know? Like the world lost its color." Grace nodded. "I know exactly what you mean." They fell silent again, painting side by side. Outside, the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, turning the room golden. Grace looked at the light playing on his face and thought about how strange it was. How two people who had lost so much could still find comfort in the same silence. By the end of the session, their canvas showed a quiet morning, a small table by a window, 2 mugs of coffee, and light spilling across the floor. It wasn't perfect, but it felt alive. Lydia came by and smiled. "That's beautiful. It feels peaceful." Tom looked at Grace and said quietly, "That's because she brought peace into it." Grace blushed. We both did. That night, Grace couldn't stop thinking about the class. She thought about the way Tom had spoken, the calm rhythm of his voice, the sadness that sat behind his gentle smile. She wasn't used to feeling this kind of warmth anymore, not from someone new. But something in her heart, long asleep, began to stir. The following week, Tom brought her coffee before class. "For my painting partner," he said with a smile. Grace laughed softly, accepting the cup. "You're making it hard to focus on the art," she joked, and he chuckled, his eyes lighting up as weeks turned into months. Their friendship deepened. They began to meet outside class, first for coffee, then for walks through the park. They talked about their children, their pasts, their dreams. Grace found herself laughing more, her eyes softer, her heart lighter. Daniel noticed it too. One evening, as they were having dinner, he said, "You've been smiling a lot lately, Mom?" Grace looked down at her plate, feeling a small flush rise to her cheeks. "Have I?" "Yeah," he said. "It's nice to see. That class must be doing wonders." She smiled faintly. "It's more than the class, I think." He grinned. "Well, whatever it is, don't stop." Grace didn't tell him about Tom yet. She didn't want to rush things, didn't even know what to call whatever was happening. All she knew was that being around Tom made her feel like herself again. Alive, curious, hopeful. One rainy evening after class, Tom offered to walk her to her car. The air was cool, the sound of rain gentle on the pavement. They stopped under the awning by the door, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Grace," he said quietly, "I'm really glad I met you." She looked up at him, her heart fluttering unexpectedly. "I'm glad too, Tom." He smiled softly, his gaze steady. "You've brought color back into my world." She didn't know what to say. For a moment, they just stood there, watching the rain fall in silver lines against the dark sky. Grace felt something inside her shift, a quiet, healing warmth she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't romance in the dramatic sense. It was gentler, deeper, a connection built on shared pain and newfound hope. That night, she wrote about it in her journal. "He's kind. He listens. He understands without me having to explain. I thought that part of my life was over, but maybe it ISN single quotes too." The next week, Lydia announced that the community center would host an art exhibition featuring students' work. Each person could submit one painting. Grace hesitated. She hadn't shown her work in public in decades. But Tom encouraged her. "You should do it," he said. "People should see what you can create." So she did. She chose the painting they'd made together, the one with the table, the mugs, and the morning light. On the night of the exhibition, the room was full of people. Grace stood beside her painting, hands trembling slightly. Daniel came too, proud and excited. When he saw the painting, his eyes softened. "That's beautiful, Mom," he said. "It feels like home." Tom arrived soon after, smiling warmly when he saw her. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. For the rest of the evening, they stood together, surrounded by art, laughter, and soft music. Grace realized how far she had come from loneliness and silence to color and companionship. Later, as the crowd thinned, Daniel walked up to her quietly. "Mom," he said, "I think Dad would be proud of you." Grace's eyes filled, but this time the tears didn't hurt. They felt gentle, cleansing. She nodded. "I think so too." As she glanced at Tom across the room, she realized something simple yet profound. Life doesn't give you only one chance at happiness. Sometimes it gives you another. Just when you've stopped looking for it, winter had arrived quietly, covering the little town in white. The trees stood bare, their branches glistening with frost. Inside her cozy home, Grace sat near the fireplace, brush in hand, working on a new painting. The canvas showed a quiet lake at dawn, a reflection of soft pink clouds, and two small figures sitting on a wooden dock, a mother and a son. She hadn't planned it that way. The image had just come to her one morning, and when she started painting, she realized what it meant. The figures weren't just any two people. They were her and Daniel from years ago, sitting by the lake they used to visit every summer when Michael was still alive. Grace smiled at the memory, feeling a bittersweet warmth. Time had changed everything, but somehow, through art, she was learning to carry her past with peace instead of pain. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Tom. "Coffee later. I have something to show you." She smiled and typed back, "I'd love to." Tom had become an important part of her life, though neither of them had tried to define what they were. They simply shared moments, conversations, quiet walks, laughter. It was easy, honest, and calm. Grace liked that there were no expectations, just understanding. Later that afternoon, she met him at their favorite cafe, a small place near the edge of town, with soft music and the smell of cinnamon in the air. Tom was already there, sitting by the window with 2 cups of coffee waiting, always early. She teased as she sat down. "Old habit," he said with a grin. "Can't seem to shake it." They talked about simple things: the snow, Lydia's next art class, Daniel's promotion at work. Then Tom reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small sketchbook. "I wanted to show you something," he said. He flipped it open to a drawing. It was her sitting by a window, painting, her face peaceful and focused. The sketch captured her exactly as she was when she lost herself in art. Her heart open and alive. Grace stared at it, speechless. "Tom, this is beautiful." He shrugged modestly. "I started sketching again after I met you. I guess you reminded me why I loved it." Her throat tightened. "You brought something back into my life, too." He smiled softly. "Then I think we helped each other." For a moment they sat in silence, the kind that feels safe and full. Grace looked out the window at the falling snow, realizing how much had changed in less than a year. She wasn't lonely anymore. The ache of loss had softened into gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had stayed, for the son who had seen her pain, and for the courage she'd found to start again. That night, back at home, Grace went into her bedroom. The house was quiet except for the faint crackle of the fireplace. As she turned down her sheets, she noticed something resting on her pillow. Her heart skipped. It was another letter. For a second, she thought she was imagining it. Then she saw Daniel's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Mom, I found this idea in an old journal of Dad's. He once wrote about how much he loved watching you paint. He said your art brought light into every corner of our home, even on the darkest days. I think he'd want you to know that you've done the same for me. You've brought light back into my life, too. You taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means loving again, living again. Thank you for finding yourself again. Mom, I'm so proud of you. Love. Daniel. Grace sat down on the edge of her bed, the letter trembling in her hands. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness this time. They were pure emotion, pride, love, peace. She pressed the paper to her chest, feeling her heart swell. Michael's memory, Daniel's love, Tom's kindness, all of it came together in that moment. The letter had started it all, and now another letter had closed the circle. The next day, she went to the community center early. The room was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows, making everything glow. She set up her easel and began painting before anyone arrived. She painted from memory, not of pain, but of peace. Her brush moved freely now. There was no hesitation, no fear. The colors flowed like a song, soft blues, warm golds, gentle greens. When she stepped back, she saw what she had painted. Her own home, the fireplace glowing, her son smiling, and a letter resting on a pillow. Lydia entered quietly behind her. That's beautiful, Grace, she said. What's it called? Grace smiled softly. A second chance. When Tom arrived later, he stood beside her, admiring the piece. It feels like hope, he said. That's what it is, she whispered. That evening, Grace invited Daniel over for dinner. The house felt warm again, music playing softly, candles glowing on the table. When Daniel walked in, his eyes widened. Wow, Mom, you really went all out. I wanted to celebrate, she said, smiling. What's the occasion? Life, she said simply. Just life. They ate, laughed, shared stories. Grace watched her son, the same boy who had once left her that letter, now grown, happy, strong. She realized that while she had taught him to be kind and brave, he had taught her something even greater: how to begin again after dinner. Daniel found the painting she had brought home from class. Is this new? He asked. Yes, she said softly. It's called A Second Chance. He looked at it for a long time, then turned to her. You've changed, Mom, Grace smiled. I've healed. Later that night, after Daniel left, she sat by the fire with a cup of tea. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in quiet peace. She thought about all the nights she had spent feeling lost, about how one simple letter had started her journey back to herself. She picked up her journal and wrote, Healing isn't about finding who you were. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. The fire flickered, casting golden light on the walls. Grace leaned back in her chair, a small smile on her face. She wasn't just living again, she was alive. And as the night deepened, she whispered softly, Thank you, Daniel, for reminding me that love doesn't end. It simply changes form. The house was silent, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of love, memory, and quiet joy. The letter on her pillow had once broken her heart. Now it had helped her rebuild it.